Tim's talk and the poem, it's pretty much all I had to say. Jesus and I used to sing that song a lot. You know, Angie, when he talks, a lot of times he kids about, I'm going to talk the next week and correct things that he said. There's really only 2 this time. It's a good day for it. One of them is that he said, I'm a professor of quantum physics. It's very kind of him, but I'm not. I don't have a degree in physics or teach it. Which doesn't mean I'm not brilliant, but I'm and the other thing is he said that to be in alignment with Divine Spirit, that you don't need any kind of degree or certificate. But in my research, I have found that Divine Spirit only recognizes people with degrees from the Emerson Institute. So you may want to look into that. Last month I talked about our spiritual evolution, and I want to talk about that some more this time, but from a different perspective, from the perspective of our themes this time of guidance and growth and understanding. And to do that, I thought I would use the vehicle of the Hinduism that teaches that there's 4 paths to enlightenment. There's the path of meditation, of devotion, the path of action or work, and the path of knowledge or understanding. And we're probably, in some ways, thinking of it spiritually, most acquainted with the path of meditation to reach that. Because we do meditation here regularly, and Susan teaches classes on it. So in meditation, of course, what you're trying to do is turn the conscious mind off from its regular aspect of looking at all of the distractions of the manifest world. And it's done through, of course, a lot of different techniques, through repeating some sounds such as Om, or concentrating on certain objects. It can be done by listening to soothing music, but the idea, of course, is to take the mind away from its regular conscious focus. And Zen Buddhism does that in a slightly different way, using meditation, but also using other techniques. I've talked before about the koans that it uses, but the idea is always to change the conscious perception so that the subconscious can then focus on the divine or accept the divine. And some interesting stories about that. One of them is about a young monk who had been studying at this one Buddhist temple, but he just didn't feel like he was getting it, and he had heard about this other one. He said, people had told him, if you go there, the teaching is just so inspired that you'll get enlightenment there. And so that's what I've got to do. So he starts hiking for miles and miles and miles, and then he comes to this river, but there had been rain up in the mountains, and the river was flooded, and he couldn't figure out how he could wade across it. He thought maybe there was some place where there would be a ford. And then he saw this older monk there walking on the other side of the river, and he called out to him and said, Master, Master, I've been told that if I can just get to the other side of the river, that's where I'm going to find enlightenment. Can you help me? How do I get to the other side? And the master looked around and then looked over at him and said, I believe you are on the other side. So it's that change of perception. Or the master, there was a professor who studied the history of all of the different Oriental religions, and was very knowledgeable, extremely well known, but somebody said, well, there's this Zen master you should go and talk to. You may get a little more from him. So he went to see him, and the Zen master brought him in. They had this tea set out with some cups and tea, and the guy started saying, but you know, before I talk to you, I just want to let you know that I know all of this stuff. And he started telling him everything he knew about Zen Buddhism and all of this stuff, and then finally he said, but I thought maybe you'd be able to give me just a little bit more. And so the master took up the teacup and started pouring the tea into the professor's cup, and he kept pouring and pouring, and it was just flowing out. And finally the professor said, wait, you can't put any more tea in there, it's already full. And he said, yes, and we are like this cup. If you're already full, you can't take any more in. So this is that kind of consciousness. I like the one about a Zen master who would walk. He had a dog, and he would throw sticks for the dog, and this monk came up to him and said, Master, I've been studying for years, and I think I just need more intense instruction in order to get it. I need somebody who's going to tell me more about what it is I need to know. And the guy said, I want you to look at this. And his dog was there, and the moon was just rising, and he pointed. He said to the dog, fetch the moon. And then he turned to the student, the monk, and said, where is the dog looking? And he said, well, he's looking at your finger. He said, yes, and that's what you're doing. The instruction is not the goal. Don't focus on it. You have to reach out there. And so that's the concept of the path of meditation, of learning to change our consciousness in order to reach this divine harmony, if you will. And then there's the path of devotion or of love, which says to focus on just intense love of the divine and love of the manifestations of the divine, people and others. Here we say God is love. And you know, there are Hindu sects that are devoted just to inspiring that love, that divine love. And part of that is you can't just love the lovable. I have to remind Gene about that every once in a while with me. You can't just love the lovable. And Jesus said that, and I'll paraphrase in this, but he said, you know, don't just love your friends. Everybody loves their friends. If you want to go beyond, you have to love your enemies. You have to take that next step. And of course, Mother Teresa was the guiding light of that in many ways. When she was starting this order of nuns, she chose Calcutta because of the intense poverty and the need of those people. And so when she was there, she was walking on the street, and there was a hospital, but lying outside on the street was this woman who was just almost dead, rats actually gnawing on her feet, and she wasn't even reacting. And so she picked her up and she carried her into the hospital. But they said that there was nothing they could do. They were full. This woman was going to be dead soon anyway. They couldn't help her. And so she had to take her back out and stayed with her. But she and the other nuns saw that there were others like that. It was so poverty-ridden that people were just lying down in the street and dying in misery. And so they got this warehouse and just set up what cots and pallets and stuff they could. And they would go around and find these people and bring them in, not to cure them because they were past that, but to show them love in their last times. And so this is part of that intense concept of devotion. And then there's the path of action or work. And of course, at the PLC, we have a lot of people who are into this. Obviously, Angie and Stella, starting the PLC, starting Emerson Theological Institute, starting Emerson New Thought Center, that's spreading this literally throughout the world. But we have lots of others in that same vein. We have Sandy and Jenny and Tim and John and I can't name you all of the people who are working here at the PLC to make it work. But this path is more than that, because you can be working not directly in the religious or spiritual field, but still be doing that, such as Susan and Tim with the Peace Symposium or their work in Haiti. I was speaking with John Lon the other day, and he was telling me about his whole career. He wanted it to be in service. You know, you can have any kind of career, which is great, but he wanted that devotion to service, and so he worked with people with disabilities. His job now, and has been for years, working with children, foster children and other children who are often abused and neglected. And that kind of work develops him spiritually. And we have teachers, we have counselors, we have a lot of people here who are in the kind of field that's going to develop them. Jean started the Children's Museum, and she talked to me about how that helped her grow. Of course, how can it not when you get to see all these little children having a great time? But more than that, in that it helped her see that she could accomplish things way beyond what she thought she ever could. And for me, I worked in the disability field for 40-some years. And so some of you know that I had a retina detachment in my left eye, and some of the others have had that. Went through 4 surgeries. It took about 9 months to get me where I'm at. Always with the idea that if that totally detaches, I'll be blind in one eye. But I didn't have any real difficulty actually dealing with it. Jean had difficulty dealing with me during all of that time. Because in my work, I worked with a man who slowly went blind over years. And, you know, it just wrenched him. He told me about it. But he runs the largest rehabilitation department in the world in California. He's married with a wonderful family. I worked with people who in their 20s were in accidents, paralyzed from the waist down, using wheelchairs all their lives. Working with a woman in LA right now with a very severe form of MS and some other things. She has to use an electric wheelchair, in pain a good deal of the time, and runs this large independent living center. And so it helped me learn that we can overcome a lot, that there's a lot in our past that we don't have to interpret as bad. And it gives us that capability. And then there's the path of knowledge or understanding. And of course, originally that was people studying the Hindu writings, but it developed way beyond that, of course, of any studying that enriches us. And Tim already kind of talked about that idea. But to me, the path of knowledge, though it doesn't have to be the path, for many of us, I think it's important for it to be a path. A supplement, even if you're taking another path. And the reason is, I think we need information and inspiration. Because if we have only information, then we have things like understanding how subatomic particles work, and what we do with it is make atomic bombs. You know, if we have information without inspiration, we make medicines that cure people of horrible diseases, and we allow them to be controlled by huge corporations where people are getting rich while poor people are dying of curable diseases. You know, we make bigger and better cars, and then literally millions of people are killed in car accidents. This is information without inspiration. But we also get inspiration without information. We get the Inquisition. We get the witch trials. You know, the witch trials came from a misinterpretation of the story of Genesis, of Adam and Eve. And people deciding that it showed that Eve was sort of in line with the devil, and so all of the women inherited that. And that's what led to thousands of women being killed in the witch trials. If we have inspiration without information, we end up with the end of the world is here. You know, that's been proclaimed over 350 times. And it seems funny until we realize that there are families who gave up everything and went to follow some leader who said the end is here. There's groups who have literally committed mass suicide saying the end of the world is here and we're going to get first in line. Information or inspiration without the right information leads us to children dying of diseases that could be cured because their parents decide that if God doesn't cure them, then God's plan is for them to die. And there are people who have had brilliant inspirations, just, you know, I mean, out of the blue, very sacred people. But I think for many of us, we have to be careful for looking for inspiration if we don't have a basis, if we haven't formed that basis of it. And as Tim talked about, there's two kinds of information. There's physical information about the physical world. Now, some people, some spiritual people teach that the manifest world is illusion, pay no attention to it. But you know, that sort of goes against our life totally. We say it's all God. Spiritually and physically, it's all God. So, if the physical world, if the manifest world has to follow spiritual laws, then we can look for those spiritual laws by looking for the physical laws. So that we can see that when you study subatomic inner particles, that they all are eventually energy, that at the beginning all energies were one energy, and that shows us that there's the one spiritual energy that we all are and that everything is. So that's the physical information. There's also, as Tim alluded to in his own phrasing, but the spiritual information. And there's obviously lots of spiritual teachings. And to me, what we have to look out for in spiritual teaching is that there were many wonderful teachings by people thousands of years ago even. And what tends to happen is over decades, centuries, etc., the teaching gets convoluted. And so we have to go look for its core. Like I mentioned earlier in a phrase, love thy neighbor. Real simple, huh? Real basic spiritual teacher, love thy neighbor. And yet, over the centuries, that's been twisted around. Yes, love thy neighbor. And thy neighbor are those of us who believe like we believe. Those people aren't your neighbor, and you don't have to love them. And that, in various forms, has been taught over and over. And so when we look at spiritual teachings, we have to find a way to go to the core of them. And so, to me, finding this is building the foundation. If we want that inspiration, we need a foundation to put it on. As Bob Dylan said in one of his songs, may you have a strong foundation when the winds of changes shift. Because let's face it, we're all desperate for this inspiration. That's such a great thing for us. But we have to be careful because it's kind of like living here right now. You're in your house. It's been smoky and you shut it all up, huh? And you wake up in the morning and it's hot and stuffy and you open that window and put in a fan and blow in this nice cool air from the night. But if you're not careful, you're blowing in the smoke and the soot and the ash. We have to have a filter there. Before we take in that nice cool air, we need a filter. And when we can do that, when we can use this information, physical or spiritual information, build us a foundation, have us a filter for the other stuff that's out there, then we can take that and we can open ourselves up to it, feeling secure of it, open ourselves up, take that inspiration, and that will light a fire inside us that will shine out to the world.